Hello, guys. Welcome back. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Good to have you. This is chapter 4 now, and with Professor Ren, and we're going to go over some important concepts, predominantly market failure, but also what makes communism what it is, what makes capitalism what it is. Income inequality is a huge point, very everyday question on people's minds, and we will address some of that in this chapter. Now, the first point is, how is capitalism different from communism? Think of the words again. Capitalism. It comes from the verb to capitalize. Of course, to capitalize is to take advantage. The question is, in what way and who can take advantage? When we're talking about capitalism up here, right, we're talking about individuals and the private sector being able to capitalize on those 5 ingredients that make up an economy that we talked about in chapter 2. The 4 resources of land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship, and the 5th one being technology. When you mix those 5 and you have multiple markets, you end up with an economy. Now, if this is capitalism over here, then the individual, you and I, a business, any private organization, can capitalize on all those 5 in order to benefit on a personal, private level. So in a capitalist system, we don't worry that maybe one person can own half the country and the other 300 million own the other half. That's irrelevant. What's relevant is that anybody can enterprise, it's about free enterprise, can become enterprising and take advantage of any of that combination of resources and technology. So we're looking at private ownership being primary. When we're talking about communism, think of the word. It comes from communion or community. It's coming from the group takes precedent over the individual. So in capitalism, the individual takes precedent over the group. We've seen the downside of that. We've seen the upside of that. Same thing with communism. The upsides and the downsides are different. Under communism, for instance, there might be more cooperation from the general public. Under capitalism, there might be more resistance. However, each one has also a downside. Communism means no one person can take significant more advantage than other people. Now remember, communism as described by Karl Marx and communism as applied by China, although not these days, not anymore, it's quite a little capitalist nation, or by the former USSR, is not what Karl Marx had in mind. But the idea of communism is that the community takes precedent and there should be public ownership, so there's more distribution of those resources. And so when you think of economics and you think of economics as the reallocation of resources, in capitalism, the reallocation of resources doesn't think fairness as much as the concept of communism. And I'm not here to argue whether it works or doesn't work, good idea or bad idea. I'm just telling you, under communism, the idea is that there is more fairness and more even distribution of income. Now, does it work that cleanly? No. Are there people who take advantage and abuse and create a corrupt system? Of course. We're dealing with humans here, which is probably why communism tends to fail. Now, there remains in the world a few communist nations. We're looking at Cuba, which is why there's often big controversy about dealing with Cuba. Laos, or maybe North Korea for sure, is not just communist, but it is also extremely oppressive. Now, often where there's communism, there is some sort of authoritarian government. And where there's capitalism, there's probably democracy. But don't confuse the two. We're not looking at political systems of sovereign nations being either under some sort of authoritarian or democratic or fascist or empirical. We're not doing that. Imperial, like, you have some sort of king or queen. We're not doing that. We're just looking at the economic models of capitalism versus communism. Socialism is generally another word for communism, even though some people use it as a bit of a milder form of communism. And don't confuse social democratic nations like Denmark, for instance, with communism or socialism. They're just nations that are perfectly democratic who still think that being in the middle class and jamming as many people in the middle class matters. And so they take steps to kind of eliminate poverty, even if it comes at the expense of becoming very, very wealthy, in order to kind of create a thicker, healthier middle class. So we're looking at private ownership versus public ownership. I'll remind you of the word public. Public means non-excludable, non-competitive, meaning it's going to cater to everybody equally. So the word public doesn't mean free. It means you have access to it, which is why we often think of something like the public transportation system. Like if you take the bus or the subway, it's not going to say you can buy a ticket and no, you cannot, unlike a taxi driver who might, for instance, not like somebody and not stop for them. They're not obligated. You know, the bus can't do that. It's just going to pick up whoever is at the bus stop. But it doesn't mean it's free. Taxpayers are paying for the buses, for the maintenance, for the labor, and you might probably have to also pay a small nominal fee, less than you would if this were a taxi, which is why we're taking it in the first place. But there's still, somebody has to pay for it, and we all end up sharing in it. So it makes it more affordable, but that's what public means. Now, wealth creation versus wealth redistribution. Look, both economies, both types of economic models, the capitalist and the communist, are going to do both, wealth create and wealth redistribute. The question is, which one is the bigger focal point? For capitalism, it is wealth creation. For communism, it is wealth redistribution. What is wealth creation? Think of it this way. Wealth redistribution is like you have a cow, you milk the cow, you distribute the milk to as much as evenly as you can to as many people as possible. Wealth creation is you get a bowl and you make many more cows, and you don't worry too much about who is getting what. So wealth creation is definitely very important for a nation. And we're going to talk about why wealth creation is relevant and why not. But just to give you an idea, wealth redistribution is more about, again, fairness, more evenness, more, having a problem with somebody having billions of dollars and yet millions of people starving and on the streets, and trying to eliminate that. It's just that it doesn't really work as well as people imagine on paper. Now, I'd like to mention to you conscientious capitalism. Capitalism gets a bad rap sometimes because, yes, it can be abused. And there's a difference between being greedy and abusive and between being enterprising but conscientious. So conscientious capitalism is about you pay your employees well. You still cater to your stockholders, but you pay your employees properly. You don't squeeze your suppliers either, so they don't go ahead and squeeze their employees. You treat your customer with respect and care, not just because you want to get as much money out of them. It's conscientiousness. It's take, for instance, right now with gas prices being very high, how we read some of the stories about some gas station owners saying, yes, I can charge $1 more like everybody else, but I'm going to just take that dollar off. Yes, it's less money out of my pocket, but people are hurting and I am still making more money than I did before. Why do I have to make 2 times, 3 times more? Maybe I can make 50% more. Maybe I can make 70% more and give somebody else a break. So the conscientious capitalism is when we apply a little bit of the brakes to extreme gluttony and greed and callousness and lack of compassion and conscientiousness. So there is such a thing as a push that capitalism is good, but can we please care at the same time for what's happening to the environment, for what's happening to other people? Others are suffering and we could be helpful here. Now, this point here is the economy is a capitalist economic model with less social nets than its counterparts. What I want you to focus on here is we are not alone in being a capitalist nation. So is Canada, so is Germany, so is France, so are most of the European nations, right? And other parts of the world as well, many parts of Asia as well. But in the US, we really have a lot less social nets if we were to compare ourselves to the 10 largest economies around the world with the most advanced situations, most advanced conditions. We will find that we really don't create as much social nets. If we were to compare ourselves to Scandinavian nations, for instance, we will see that in the US, we don't have as much help with children, as much time off, as much paid vacation, as much healthcare. Like our healthcare continues to be very expensive, but it is much more affordable in other parts of the world. We just continue to have social, retirees who are poor and no help for them. Nobody can hire them. They can't really do a job, or people don't want to hire them, but now Social Security is too low. So we have way less social nets, which is why it is so important to kind of focus on the being conscientious and having a conscience and caring and having compassion while still profiting as individuals. So these are just interesting points for you to keep in mind. Okay, we're going to start video 2 next.